Ladies and gentlemen, I was on Telegram in the usual places that I like to hang out in, and lo and behold, I discover this Atlantic article. Now, if you ever want to know what the left is really up to, just go read The Atlantic, because the whole plan is laid out for you. And this article was brought to my attention by Lucian from Freedom Alternative, and it's called Let's Declare a Pandemic Amnesty, because we need to forgive one another for what we did and said when we were in the dark about the coup, by Emily Oster. Now, immediately, that just made me laugh out loud at these same people that demonised me and you 2 years, saying that if you didn't wear a mask, if you didn't get the government-mandated vaccine, you will be killing grandma, you'll be putting the NHS or any other welfare or government-run institution at risk if you don't do this, if you don't do that. You're an anti-vaxxer, you don't care about the science, you're evil, you're nasty, you should be arrested, you should be fined, your whole life should be ruined because we feel scared about what ultimately was a flu. We should apparently have amnesty. We should have forgiveness for these people. Apparently, we should say sorry to these people also, because apparently we did wrong. Those of us who said that actually all of this is stupid, the lockdowns, the mandatory vaccinations. Oh, no. We have to apologise to them for some reason. It should be a mutual exchange. Just like at school when you got bullied by another pupil and you kick their asses, and then the teacher says you both are at fault, even though you're the victim and were defending yourself. You have to shake this person's hand because you're both as bad as each other, apparently. That's what we should do. But anyway, let's get into the article, because you can already tell how I feel about this. In April 2020, with nothing else to do, my family took an enormous number of hikes. We all wore cloth masks that I had made myself. We had a family hand signal, which the person in the front would use if someone was approaching on the trail, and we needed to put on our masks. Once, when another child got too close to my then 4-year-old son on a bridge, he yelled at her, "Social distancing!" Imagine being so hypochondriac, so wrapped up into the hysteria that was going on at that time, that you even brainwashed your child to become a Karen and shout social distancing at another kid. Bearing in mind that we even knew at the time that children weren't really affected as much by the disease as adults were. I mean, special hand signals, cloth masks that she made herself, which wouldn't protect you at all. And these are the people who claimed to know everything, who had all the knowledge, who knew exactly what they were doing, yet they were making cloth masks that were ineffective. These precautions were totally misguided. In April 2020, no one got the coronavirus from passing someone else hiking. Outdoor transmission was vanishingly rare. Our cloth masks made out of old bandanas wouldn't have done anything anyway. But the thing is, we didn't know. Well, actually, anybody who knows anything about how masks are manufactured and how transmission works could have told you at that time, and it wouldn't have worked. There were people at the time saying, yeah, these cloth masks, they're not effective unless they have either some kind of different material or a filter, or if you don't change them regularly. As Jim Jesus told me, it used to be, before the pandemic, that if you were wearing a mask in the medical setting, you had to change it not just every couple of hours, not just any couple of days, like some people did. No, once every hour. But apparently all that went out the window during the pandemic, and people were not doing it anywhere near as much as they should have done. And as we know, if you wear these masks too much, it develops moisture, and this moisture develops bacteria and disease, meaning even if you don't get COVID from it, you would get something else. I have been reflecting on this lack of knowledge thanks to a class I'm co-teaching at Brown University on COVID. We've spent several lectures reliving the first year of the pandemic, discussing the many important choices we had to make under conditions of tremendous uncertainty. Well, you know, we could have all done what Sweden did and not have to have this tremendous uncertainty, but you know, details. Some of these choices turned out better than others. To take an example close to my own work, there is an emerging, if not universal, consensus that schools in the US were closed for too long. The health risks of in-school spread were relatively low, whereas the costs to students' well-being and educational progress were high. Was it really though? Although, depending on the person, obviously, but I think most kids probably benefited being out of these ideological factories where they're being brainwashed with CRT and gender nonsense. And in fact, if schools weren't closed for too long, there would have been no way that parents who really should have known better and should have been engaged in the school's curriculum and looking at what their children were learning. But yes, if we're talking about being behind in their education, then yes, it's pretty bad. The latest figures on learning loss are alarming, but in spring and summer 2020, we only had glimmers of information. Reasonable people who cared about children and teachers, advocated on both sides of the reopening debate. No, actually, these people didn't care about kids. If they cared about kids, they wouldn't be brainwashing them with this nonsense, and also wouldn't be demanding that schools be closed, pushing back their education and development even further, because even though they're being brainwashed with all this nonsense, they are still learning important things, the usual stuff like reading and writing, mathematics, the sciences, and stuff like that. Yes, we now have people who are literally behind in their education that otherwise wouldn't be. Another example, when the vaccines came out, we lacked definitive data on the relative efficacies of the Johnson & Johnson shot versus the mRNA option from Pfizer and Moderna. Literally, people were saying that at the time. We said, look, we don't know how effective they are. They're literally just come straight out of the can. They haven't been tested. We don't know if they're going to work. The mRNA vaccines have won out. But at the time, many people in public health were either neutral or expressed a J&J preference. This misstep wasn't nefarious, it was the result of uncertainty. I'm sure it was definitely uncertainty, and definitely not because Big Pharma was pumping money into these things, and these doctors, who also get paid by said people, wanted to peddle this to get their said payments. Obviously, some people intended to mislead and made wildly irresponsible claims. Couldn't possibly be yourself included in that. Remember, when the public health community had to spend a lot of time and resources urging Americans not to inject themselves with bleach? I wish I could remember that. I don't remember that being a thing. That was bad. Misinformation was and remains a huge problem, but most errors were made by people who were working in earnest for the good of society. Yeah, because it wasn't like the so-called experts weren't also preventing Americans from getting actually good treatments because these treatments went against their big pharma overlords. Given the amount of uncertainty, almost every position was taken on every topic, and on every topic, someone was eventually proved right, and someone else was proved wrong. It wouldn't be all those people who you accused of being anti-vaxxers and anti-science were in the end proven correct, right? In some instances, the right people were right for the wrong reasons. In other instances, they had a prescient understanding of the available information. Hindsight really is 20/20, guys. People who got it right for whatever reason may want to gloat. Yes, I will gloat. Those who got it wrong for whatever reason may feel defensive and retrench into a position that doesn't accord with the facts. All of this gloating and defensiveness continues to gobble up a lot of social energy and to drive the culture wars, especially on the internet. These discussions are heated, unpleasant, and ultimately unproductive. In the face of so much uncertainty, getting something right had a hefty element of luck, and similarly, getting something wrong wasn't a moral failing. Treating pandemic choices as a scorecard on which some people racked up more points than others is preventing us from moving forward. The people who advocated the complete destruction of other people's lives, removing them from their jobs, putting them in financial peril, and also making sure that people who suffered from cancer or potentially could be suffering from cancer, dementia, diabetes, any other dangerous disease couldn't get treatment because of a flu. Apparently that's not a moral failing. Apparently advocating for a Chinese-style lockdown where people were welded into their homes is apparently not a moral failing. These were people who were just wrong. They were just following orders. All these doctors and nurses who had nothing better to do for most of the pandemic, making TikTok videos and demanding that we clap and respect them when they were refusing treatment of people who really needed it, and then once the lockdowns were over, were shocked to discover that there were so-called excess deaths, and they're still increasing and they don't know what to do, and now they have a backlog of patients. Ugh. These people were just wrong and following orders. Spare me. And as for fueling the culture war, well, I'm sorry, but this culture war started way before the pandemic, and the pandemic only made it worse because you lot made it a political issue. We didn't make it a political issue, we saw it as a medical issue. But you, in your communist ways, had to make it a political issue as a means of getting further control for the state. We have to put these fights aside and declare a pandemic amnesty. More on that at the end of the video, people. But the cheek of this is, let's just say, infuriating. We can leave out the willful purveyors of actual misinformation while forgiving the hard calls that people had no choice but to make with imperfect knowledge. Except they didn't have necessarily imperfect knowledge. Anybody could tell you, even at the time, like the guy who was running Sweden's pandemic response could tell you that all of this was going to be wrong, but you chose to ignore them because you got either wrapped up in hysteria or you wanted state control. Los Angeles County closed its beaches in summer 2020. Ex post facto, this makes no more sense than my family's masked hiking trips. But we need to learn from our mistakes and then let them go. We need to forgive the attacks too, because I thought schools should reopen and argue that kids as a group were not at high risk. I was called a teacher killer and a genocidaire. A teacher killer, wow. I could think of worse things to be called. It wasn't pleasant, but feelings were high, and I certainly don't need to dissect and rehash that time for the rest of my days. Moving on is crucial now, because the pandemic created many problems that we still need to solve. Oh yeah, the increase of obesity, depression, children not being able to properly develop socially because their parents are wearing masks indoors. Take your pick. Student test scores have shown historic declines, more so in math than in reading, and more so for students who were disadvantaged at the start. We need to collect data, experiment and invest. Is high dosage tutoring more or less cost effective than extended school years? Why have some states recovered faster than others? We should focus on questions like these because answering them is how we will help our children recover. All of this is something I don't need to expand upon because it's glaringly obvious that the states that recovered the quickest were the ones that had the least craziest policies in regards to the coof. That's it. And as for collecting data and experimenting and investing, it's all out there. Many people have neglected their healthcare over the past several years. No, we didn't neglect our healthcare. The healthcare professionals that we placed our trust in for many years, which, let's be honest, nowadays seems pretty misplaced, neglected our health. We couldn't go to the doctor because it wasn't deemed essential. It was deemed non-essential, and that therefore we should ignore that weird pain in our side and that weird growth in our leg, because it's not COVID. Notably, routine vaccination rates for children for measles, pertussis, etc. are way down. I wonder why that is. It couldn't be that your crazy hysteria towards vaccines and how anybody who was at the least bit skeptical of this new one that wasn't tested and had questionable side effects and stuff like that made people think, you know what, if they were wrong about this, are they wrong about the others? Which, by the way, isn't necessarily the case. But you get my point. Rather than debating the role that messaging about COVID vaccines had in this decline, we need to put all our energy into bringing these rates back up. You should be debating the role about your messaging because that's one of the main reasons why vaccination rates are down. People saw how you lied, saw how you bullied about it, and thought, well, why should I? You've actually created more genuine anti-vaxxers through your crazy rhetoric than you could have done had you just said, yeah, make your own personal choice, you're adults. Paediatricians and public health officials will need to work together on community outreach, and politicians will need to consider school mandate. Yeah, it's too late. You've done too much damage. It's over and it's done. The standard saying is that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. But dwelling on the mistakes of history can lead to a repetitive doom loop as well. Citation needed on that. Either we forget history and are doomed to repeat it, or we don't forget it and end up in a doom loop, whatever that means. So don't learn from your lessons, but try to learn from your lessons. Let's acknowledge that we made complicated choices in the face of deep uncertainty, and then try to work together to build back and move forward. Well, I hate to say it, Emily, but no. There can be no amnesty. There can be no goodwill towards people like you and all the people like you. You ruined our lives for 2 years. You arrested people and fined people for going out of their homes for apparent non-essential means of business and stuff like that. You bullied and coerced people into taking a vaccine on the threat of losing their jobs. You tried to implement China-style totalitarianism where people would be put under mass surveillance from not just out and about in the streets with CCTV, but through a QR code society, just like how China runs with social credit systems in regards to their health. Can't go anywhere unless you have a certain vaccination status. You tried to micromanage how we ran our lives from mask mandates, telling us how often we can exercise out of our homes, which is what the Conservative Party in this country actually said. You should go for no more than an hour outside of your house at a time. You stopped us from visiting our family members even when we were clearly well enough to go and attend and look after them. You refused to treat people with serious conditions and illnesses which only got worse because of a disease that was nowhere near as bad as these. And yet you expected our undying respect for people like you and the medical professionals that were just following orders. What about all those people who were left unemployed by the actions of the state, who said that these people were non-essential and therefore shouldn't go to work because of the risk of their health. And yet, lo and behold, barely 6 months after most of the world has finally opened up for good, we're now in the middle of a recession. Yes, the war has made it worse. Yes, inflation has made it worse. But all of that stems, the war aside, all of the rest of that stems from the pandemic and the borrowing and the terrible financial policies that were enacted in order to pay for this, because lo and behold, all these non-essential workers in a mostly service-based economy in the West, turns out we were important because we're the ones who make the money that keeps the economy going. And now, as cost of living increases, inflation raises prices, now you're wondering why all of this is happening. There can be no amnesty until you lot are punished for what you did to us. That means you deserve jail terms. This means that you deserve fines. You deserve the complete destruction of your lives for all that you did to us. And still, I don't think it would be enough. It will not be enough for the people that died. It won't be enough for the people who lost everything. There won't be amnesty until we say there's amnesty. And there won't be amnesty until you lot get your just deserves. Anyway, I'll leave it there, guys. I'll see you all later.